All right, thanks for your attention. We're going to go ahead and get this panel started. This panel addresses local activism for animals, what you can do. My name is Matt Rossell. I'm the campaigns manager for the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And before we get started, I would like to give a special thank you to our platinum sponsor, the Brooks Institute for Animal Rights, Law, and Policy. We appreciate their ongoing support in helping us to make events like this possible. This session will explore what you can do in your community. We've learned a lot this weekend. Hope you're all excited to bring this energy back home. There's 4 different voices here today, 2 animal law attorneys and 2 animal activists who are going to give you their perspective on what you can do locally. And then I hope you can bring some ideas back with you. Along with me is Rebeka Breder, David Casselman, and Aaron Leider. I will introduce them right before they speak, but I'm going to go first and share my perspective. Okay, so in this short time that I have with you, I really want to share with you some stories of activism that have been successful and hopefully spark your imagination to find out what you can do to help animals at home. This is my path of advocacy. This picture, the picture that you're about to see is a picture that I took as a security guard at Boys Town Research Hospital. I worked there and I had all the keys to the place, and I stumbled across what was happening there to young kittens. 1- and 2-day-old kittens were having invasive experiments on them. The lucky ones didn't survive. The surgeries were botched. These kittens were suffering. I didn't know what to do, so I contacted PETA, and they asked me if I could go ahead and try to document some things. This led to an unlikely career as an undercover abuse investigator, and I went on to work for a month on Walker Brothers Circus. I was following Loda and Liz, 2 elephants who were sick with tuberculosis. I worked for 4 months during the pelting season of an Illinois fox farm to document the atrocities there. I've been inside of many different factory farms. There they are, those poor kids. Just to let you know, though, after I blew the whistle there, those kitten experiments were eventually shut down. And I worked for a shift on a South Omaha slaughterhouse. And my last undercover investigation, I spent 2 years as a primate technician at the Oregon National Primate Research Center. And I felt like all of these experiences were a huge privilege that informed the next couple of decades of action. I was campaigning for animals with some successes and some failures. I worked for a lot of local, state, and legislative campaigns. But really, what I would like to do is share stories of some of the people I met along the way that have inspired me, because I think they will inspire you as well. And pictured here on the left is John Poposh. He's a council member here in Los Angeles, and his deputy chief of staff on the right, or I'm sorry, council member Blumenfield on the left, and deputy chief of staff John Poposh on the right. And these photos were taken on the day in Los Angeles when the Los Angeles City Council passed a ban on fur, the retail sale of fur. It was an amazing day. This was in 2018. And these men really helped lead this campaign. And this is Keisha Jaran and Gary Smith, pictured here with 2 beagles rescued from a research lab, Josephine and Nancy. And Keisha and Gary are expert at getting media attention, and they work with an organization that rescues labs from research, and then they tell their stories and make them ambassadors for the ones who are left behind. And this is Corey Mack, and she's seen here in front of a Nike outlet store. She is protesting their use of kangaroo skin for soccer cleats. She also organizes weekly outreach outside of the Los Angeles Zoo on a campaign to free Billy the elephant, where a couple of my fellow panelists are going to discuss in more detail. And this is my friend, Bonnie Price. She lives and works in Omaha, Nebraska as a court reporter. And her advocacy surrounds exposing the police shooting dogs in their line of duty. And Elsa, the dog pictured on the right, was a 13-year-old blind and arthritic dog who was actually fleeing from the police when she was shot by them. And with the help of a national organization, she did actually survive the shooting, and with the help of a national organization, Bonnie was able to bring a federal suit on behalf of this dog. And this is my friend, Eric Phelps. And as long as I've known him, no matter what he's got going on in his life, he has always found time to foster kittens. And this led him to start his own organization called Sister Kitten in Asheville, North Carolina, where he helps cats that are in the community to trap, neuter, and return them, and also pulls cats from shelters like this cat here and find them loving homes. And this is Heather Wilson in action. She is protesting the Professional Bull Riders event in Orange County. Heather focuses on horse racing and rodeo, and she has relentlessly worked for the past almost 5 years now here in LA to get a ban on rodeos. If you're an Angelino, please talk to me about this campaign afterwards. We could really use your help. We're getting close to the finish line. And this wonderful advocate, Patty Shankar, has done so much for animals, but her most recent contribution has been, she authored a book called Paul and Bucky. And this is the true childhood story of Captain Paul Watson and his adventures and meeting a wild beaver and how that formed his early activism. And David Wagella is the artist on the left there. He is also a local advocate and great artist. And this is my friend, Pamela Brodsky. She's the type of friend that sees a cat suffering on Facebook and she calls you up, and the next thing you know, like, your bathroom is full of kittens. We've done some wonderful work together helping cats, and she started this group, Reading to the Rescue, where she works on children's literacy as well as advocacy for animals by getting kids to read books to rescue animals. And my friend here, Maria Ramirez, she's a neighbor who saw a problem in our neighborhood, and that is there are cats everywhere. I live kind of in South LA, and she decided to do something about it. So she started taking care of them, and the more she took care of, the more cats she found. She's now taking care of multiple cat colonies, and she has more than 80 cats that depend on her every day. And this is Zora Fahim. She stumbled across the Griffith Park pony rides, and she made a promise to them. She saw the conditions they were living in, and after more than a year of weekly outreach outside the pony rides, multiple visits to City Hall, canvassing the neighborhoods around the park, and just tons of hours and hours of organizing, she made good on that promise. And the Los Angeles Park and Rec has now shut down, after 70 years, these pony rides that no longer meet our community ethical standards. And the image on the left here is my friend Gigi Glendenning. And this is the exact spot where she sat 42 painstaking performances of the Lulu Shrine Circus that came to her township, White Marsh Township in Pennsylvania. She filmed and documented, and it took her 6 years to convince the local council to finally pass an exotic animal ban there. And my friend Gina Lynn is not the only person I know who has dreamed of starting an animal sanctuary, but she had the determination and tenacity to actually do it. And Gina worked for years on anti-vivisection campaigns, and now she has New Life Animal Sanctuary in Lake Elsinore, California, where she rescues animals from research like the ones pictured here. And this is Amelia Barella, and she is a new friend who I met lobbying at City Hall on the rodeo ban. She is a professional voiceover talent, and she donates her time to animal protection organizations and uses her talent in this way. And I think this is a great example of how we can all look at our own lives, think about the skills that we have and how they might overlap with animals, because contributions like this are invaluable to organizations like ours. And this is Nadi Casanova. They are another new friend of mine, and they're doing a lot of work in the community for animals. They're a vegan activist, but one of the things that on social media, they go by the moniker of the zombie unicorn, and have gathered more than 100,000 followers and expertly use this platform to speak out for animals. And so that brings me to our social media outreach, which is called ROAR. And we would really love for you to join us. You can go to aldf.org/volunteer. You don't need to be a social media influencer to make a difference on your social media. And you'll get an email every week where we will encourage you to push out or to post something that we have highlighted on our social media to extend our reach and to save animals with us. And you'll also have the opportunity to get fabulous prizes like this cool roar patch we'll send you if you sign up. And last but not least, Brian Monell is a friend who went deep undercover at Carson and Barnes Circus to expose the abuse of elephants and other animals there. The stories that he tells are harrowing, and really, quite literally, he barely escaped with his life. And we can all be inspired by heroism like this. Not that we're going to necessarily go to this length, but keep in mind that we all have opportunities to witness neglect and abuse in our own communities of animals, and we all have video cameras in our pocket, and we can document those things, and to great effect for the animals. So it's something to always keep in mind. And then I just want to give a Prop 12 update. I think that no grassroots activism conversation in California, it would be remiss to not mention how much energy went into this in 2018. Hundreds of volunteers gathered all the signatures necessary to put Prop 12 on the ballot, which, as you know, was an initiative that passed to combat some of the worst forms of confinement for mother pigs in factory farms and hens in egg-laying production and calves raised for veal. When it passed, of course, the ag industry pushed back with lawsuits, and the Animal Legal Defense Fund and other coalition partners worked very hard to defend this law in multiple courts until it finally made it to the Supreme Court. And on May 11th of 2023, SCOTUS upheld this law, and it is now in effect. But we always have to stay vigilant. And I want to mention just briefly the Ending Agricultural Trade Suppression Act, or the EATS Act, which has been introduced into Congress. This threatens to undercut laws like Prop 12, and we must defeat this law. There is a concern that it could get introduced as language into a must-pass bill like the Farm Bill. And so please, if you haven't already, you can go to our action alert, which is aldf.org/EATS, EATS. You can send a member to your representatives. And if you want to get with me after this program, we can talk more about what you can do to defeat this bad legislation for animals. And finally, in conclusion, I just want to say that I'd love to invite you all to volunteer with the Animal Legal Defense Fund. The pictures you see here are some of the great advocates that we've been bringing to City Hall. If you're in Los Angeles, we'd love to work with you. I work on the campaigns team with Abby Banesh, and together, whether you're here in LA or elsewhere, if you wanted to start a local campaign in your community and want some support from a national organization, we would consider that. There's a lot of opportunities to help us remotely to save animals together. So I would love to make this the beginning, not the end of a conversation. And I really appreciate your time. Here's my email address. Please reach out. And that concludes my portion of this presentation. Thanks for your attention. So next up, I am going to introduce David Casselman. David is a recognized trial specialist, successfully representing both plaintiffs and defendants for decades. Throughout his 42-year legal career, he served as a pro bono capacity as a passionate defender of animals. Among his many animal-related cases, he represented Robert Culp and Aaron Leider, who is also here today, in a highly publicized litigation over the premature deaths of elephants and the long-standing imprisonment of Billy the elephant at the Los Angeles Zoo. Additionally, David has co-founded and is the director of the Cambodia Wildlife Sanctuary. Please help me introduce David Casselman.
Good morning. So everybody's got their origin story. Everybody who's doing something for animals can trace it back to something. In my case, I spent, you heard, many, many decades before I even found out what my origin story was. It was in me. I just didn't know what the moment was. It was the kid. So you may know something or you may not, but as a lawyer, we need your help. There are definitely not enough lawyers representing animals. And I have to tell you, when I first started, I thought, what a great thing. I can represent animals and the firm I'm working for is going to be thrilled because I'm bringing in money. Well, I think it may have been the second case. And the client said, I can't afford to keep going. I'm going to have to euthanize my animal. And it was one of those faceplant moments. You can't. And she said, well, I can't afford to pay. And I went to my partners and I said, we need to do this pro bono. And they said, you're crazy. I said, agreed, but we need to do this pro bono because there's too much that needs to be done. Nobody else is going to do this. And 40 years ago, I felt like I was the Lone Ranger. I wasn't, but I felt like I was. And so we were inventing and stumbling all the time. And I have to tell you, even starting now, you're going to run into things that have not been considered before, haven't been done. Falling down is not failure. Staying down is failure. Your failures are going to illuminate and really show you the path to success. So embrace them. You know not to go down that road again, and you find the right road. I'm going to jump into the Billy case because seeing this array of amazing people in cases, I was thinking, okay, I was involved in that. Oh, I remember that. And these things are going to go, same with you in your career. You're going to see great people doing great things. Be inspired, help them. Okay, so I was invited to step into something that many, many people have been working on, and nobody really succeeded. And frankly, we didn't either. I thought we did, and I'll explain. I'm going to cram 8 years, $7 million of time into about 6 or 7 minutes. So in any lawsuit where you're representing an animal, and that's really the fact, you're representing the animal. The people that bring you the case have the right to bring a suit if it's their animal. But what do you do? Because if you're like me, I was motivated by the animal more than the people. And if you don't have a client who owns the animal, how do you bring that case to court? Standing is the critical issue in many, many animal cases. Billy represents sort of the, for a period of time, at least high watermark in that field. So we invented a theory of standing using Code of Civil Procedure 526A. I've tried to boil the entire case down to snippets. It permits an action for a restraining order, basically injunctive relief, to stop illegal expenditures, waste of, or injury to public property. And you can enjoin the public official or the entity. And it occurred to me, the elephants in the LA Zoo are property. Much as I don't like that, that's a fact. We could use that in our favor. So we decided we would try and stop them by seeking an injunction for their illegal expenditure of funds in violation of the animal cruelty laws, and also for their injury to the elephants in the zoo. They were killing them. And we had years and years of records that we studied. So we filed this case, immediately thrown out of court, went to the Court of Appeal. It was reversed. The Court of Appeal said that we had standing. So then we went through the long procedure of discovery and trial. It took many, many years. We finally got to trial, and the trial court found in our favor on the illegal expenditure provision, finding that they were violating animal cruelty laws. He also made it clear that we were pursuing the injury prong. It's not like he missed it. And he said, it's undisputed, the elephants are property. And for the reasons stated above, we've met our burden. And then he enumerated the penal codes that we cited that he thought were sufficient. And he also made an express finding that we're injuring the elephants. I thought, we're going to win on both counts. This is fantastic. There was a third standing basis, that's waste of public funds. But the case law is so intense and so confusing, I decided to streamline and not go down that road. So we pursued two, and in the trial court, we thought we had won. The cruelty was unbelievable. This is a clip from a clip used at trial involving Billy when he was very young at the LA Zoo, when they forced him to lay down by pulling his legs out from under him with chains and hydraulic equipment. But despite the finding that they were injuring the elephants, the court would not enjoin the zoo at all. What he said was, on the injury prong, there are no reported cases applying the statute. So he was saying that he had no standard by which he could measure or test our claim that they're injuring the elephants. He found they were injuring the elephants. I still don't understand how you can make that finding if you say you don't have a basis to make the finding. But nonetheless, that's what he did. He found that they were injuring the elephants, but that he wouldn't enforce that prong because there was no prior case. Now, we're not talking about me inventing a theory. This is the statute that says you can get an injunction if they're injuring. And he found they're injuring. How he rationalized that he couldn't give relief after he made all the relevant findings, I still don't know. So we go up, Billy's pretty upset about it. We go up to the Court of Appeal. We had to hear that case twice in the local Court of Appeal. We won both times. The court affirmed the illegal expenditure provision in our favor. They acknowledged we were pursuing the injury prong, and then they were dead silent on the injury prong. So when the city, who was defending the zoo, the city attorney, appealed from that to the Court of Appeal and asked for a rehearing, they pointed this out that we've got one prong, and we pointed out that we've got this other prong. The court heard it again, and the second time around, they did not make any statement about the injury prong. They affirmed again, left the injury prong silent. Only case in my career where I wanted to go to the Supreme Court that I never got to the Supreme Court on a case I wanted to. The one case I didn't want to, we got to the Supreme Court. The argument, in at least my view, and everybody who was with us at the time, and Aaron was there, the argument went smoothly. I mean, there was really nothing raised that signaled what came next. The court took up the case, and they expressly confirmed, let me see which slide that was. Yeah, they concluded in the Supreme Court decision that no taxpayer can pursue a civil action under 526A, which expressly says a taxpayer can pursue an action under 526A, to enjoin this kind of abusive action by in this case, the public entity. Why? That's what the statute says you can do. They said because it's a civil statute, but it could have been brought to pursue criminal relief. And that's not true, but they said it anyway. They didn't raise it in oral argument. They didn't let us respond to this totally off the wall theory. But what they're saying is you can't use a criminal statute for an injunction because the defendant would have a right to a jury trial, and they don't in an injunctive proceeding. But it wasn't a criminal action. It was civil. The city passed on a jury trial. They had the opportunity. The court gave them that right. They said no. And we were stuck with a Supreme Court conclusion. Now, the thing that's really upsetting about it is they're saying it could have been brought as such. And that's true. But guess who could have brought that case as a criminal action? The city attorney. They enforced the animal cruelty laws. And they chose not only to not enforce it, they chose to defend the zoo for a conduct that it was palpably in violation of all the statutes. So the city attorney didn't seek it. The city attorney defended against it. And then they had the audacity to argue that we wouldn't be able to pursue it because it could have been brought as a criminal case. The moral of the story is Billy is stuck, and they threw out, in effect, the first prong. So we get to the injury prong. We raised it in all of our papers saying trial court found, Court of Appeal was silent. This is an alternative theory of relief. And the court, again, literally ignored the issue. Now, what's particularly upsetting about it is they found against us. If they had found our favor on the first issue, this would be redundant and not that important. But having found they were going to reverse the first prong, finding against us by silently ignoring the second prong is, I think, a dereliction of their duty. And the most sad fact, I think, in the case is the city attorney had a huge conflict of interest. Their duty is to prosecute the criminal law. They're also entitled to defend their public entities, but they can't do it where those interests collide. And so the conflict involved where they refused to prosecute and instead defended with a conflict of interest and then pointed to the fact that only they could have brought the case criminally, I think was shameful. But the bottom line is Billy's still behind bars. So we have been campaigning for years since. This stands as I think, a lesson in terms of the standing issues. We got by one part of standing, we didn't get by the rest. And I fear that if anybody tries this statute again, this case is published, they're gonna cite it, and it's terrible, frankly. And the only way it got to the Supreme Court is after we filed the case, and we were in the court for years going through discovery and fighting every kind of war you can imagine. The theory of the case was picked up in another case, and it was pursued under facts that were a little more questionable, I think, in terms of its relevance. And that case went to a judgment adverse to a finding of standing in the Northern California district local courts. The net effect was we had California split between the 4th district and a northern district. Second district and a northern district. And that's why the Supreme Court took the case. So if we had moved our case faster to trial, we probably could have avoided it. If we had other things happen, if Billy's still behind bars. So we are pursuing every avenue we have. I've obtained support to fly Billy to Cambodia, to our sanctuary. I've got support to fly him to Thailand, to a partner sanctuary, Elephant Nature Park. We just have to get him out, and this current administration doesn't seem to have any patience. So eventually I've retired. I haven't given up. I'm no longer practicing law. So I thought I'll attack this problem another way. So I started Ecoflix, which is the first streaming nonprofit video service dedicated to animals and the planet. It has two basic premises. We produce film alone and in partnership with NGOs around the world. The film and the platform is free to schools. There are no commercials. It's all inspiring, no gruesome imagery. It's perfect for kids. And the idea for the NGO side of it is they can have their members join. If you join for a year, it's $3.99 a month, $47.80 a year. And if 1,000 people of their supporters join, they get 100% of the money. We don't get the money. So they can reach out to their own supporters wherever they are, and they're all over the world, and they get money, which they wouldn't otherwise get. That is supporting now over 70 NGOs around the world, and we're very excited to be doing it. But there's another side to Ecoflix, because Ecoflix has, here we go. It's on your phone, computers, and Apple TV. And by the way, I gave a free QR code at the desk. If anybody wants to have a free copy of the channel, just QR code and you'll see it. And we partner around the world, and we are trying to gain more and more by partnering with more diverse NGOs and create more and more films. Now, at the same time, there are many issues that are really important. And if you look around the world, some of them have dozens and dozens of people working on them, and others have nobody working on them. I don't want to compete with anybody else to try and be the first one to solve a problem that 10 people are working on. I'd be more interested in trying to put my energy into something nobody's doing. And one of those problems, and there are about 8 of them that we're working on now around the world, but one of them I thought I'd bring out here is, we're calling it whale watch. Whales are dying at the rate of about 20,000 a year in the open ocean, more within the 12-mile zones where countries own their boundaries. And it's caused by ship strikes. The ships are rushing to get where they're going, and it's terrible. So we have created this platform. We have designed custom-made drones that launch from every ship. And the idea is to alert them with a carbon credit program that will fund all of this so that we can stop this problem. This is just a breakdown of the drones. I'm out of time. Thank you.
Okay, next up, Leider is a dedicated advocate, motivated by his desire to fight against vivisection. He began his activism during World Week for Animals in Laboratories and has since appeared on television debating vivisectors, public agencies, and educators, among others. Was also the plaintiff in the lawsuit that was just described, that was over 7 years, charging the city of Los Angeles and the Los Angeles Zoo with the premature death of the elephant, Billy. So without further ado, Aaron.
Billy is still alive, but the unfortunate thing is that almost 14 elephants during the course of the LA Zoo statistically live less than 50% of their lives. The LA Zoo, for whatever reason, is particularly harmful to elephants, and especially even with the $40 million quote, beautiful place they built, which I'll get into, is not the truth. So what I want to do is, whoops, it already went up. Thank you. As I enter my 5th decade as an animal activist, my question to all of you is, why are you here? And what is your goal? And the thing that's so interesting to me is, what is your why? What is going to motivate you? Because here's the one thing I can tell you. You get on this train and this train moves. And unless you really are thinking about what's important to you and where you want to go, you might get pulled in a million directions, because unfortunately there is so much hardship and so much tears and so much pain, not only in your activism, but it falls into your personal life. It falls everywhere. And how are you going to deal with it? And what I have found is that if you really know what your why is, if we start with that, then you'll be able to be better suited to help and be very effective in your activism. The why, if you kind of know exactly why you're doing it, you'll just be better suited. Now, there's a thing called in business a resource audit. And what I like to do with the resource audit is, who are you? What is your skill set? What is your financial capability? And I'll get into that in a second. And what kind of mental stamina do you have for this? Because the rewards are far and in between. They really are. Gina Lynn and New Hope for Animals, her sanctuary, she was my student when I taught animal activism at Last Chance for Animals. And I have to tell you, I just got to chill. It's like something that just is amazing that she went forward, she did it, and she's thriving in a very painful world, but she's doing it. So what is your skill set? What do you have to offer? Are you someone who's going to take on something on your own, or you're better suited to take it on with a group? Is this going to be your earning? Are you going to make an earning doing this, make a living doing this? Or are you going to be able to financially support yourself as you're doing this type of work? These are all really good questions that you should ask yourself in advance. Because I can tell you the road's not very clear. Because for myself, I had enjoyed a lot of financial success, sold a business, made a 5-year plan to jump in, and I worked with a couple of different groups. But guess what? All those groups were in financial hardship, and I ended up giving my money away. And after 3 years, I was like, oh, that's the end of that 5-year plan. I got to go back to work. So it's really good to have your eyes open and to figure out where you're going and what you're doing. So with Last Chance for Animals, and it's a little hard for you guys to see, but this was a talk that I was giving on vivisection. As Matt said, my background, my learned background was vivisection. I got really involved in it. And here's what I learned about my why. I could not stand people in positions of authority, people in the public eye, teachers lying. I hated the lies. That's what really was my motivation. How dare you stand up in front of a group of people and lie? And it was really, not only are you lying, you're lying about horrible things. You're making things that are absolutely in no way acceptable. You're making that they are acceptable. Your baby, your dog or your baby. You know what, buddy, you're killing both. So I don't want to really hear about that argument at all. And what you see there in these pictures, and let me see if I've got a close-up of, yeah, I do. This is from 1988, and this is from the brain vivarium at UCLA. I took all of those pictures. Those pictures, we would learn later on after being arrested that night, for the first time were distributed worldwide on CNN. It was something that really didn't kind of exist before. The world has changed drastically in the way of information. And these pictures went, more importantly, when those went out on the evening news, UCLA at 12 o'clock had that day had a news conference where they showed a fluffy bunny in a cage that was in perfect health and looked very happy and say, we don't do anything that they're accusing us of. So this was the first opening of the door to what was really happening there. But keep in mind, the work that you do can have devastating repercussions, because that date is not the date we were in the lab. That was the date that all those cats were destroyed, which was 3 days later from when we were in that lab. And I have to tell you, though there was thoughts of trying to get them out, with what they had done to them, they were already so far gone. They had brain implants in them. And their death was probably their mercy at that point. And it was a hard decision that was made as the police are going to bang in the door trying to get us out of this vivarium, which we had locked ourselves into. So you find yourself in this world where Richard Nixon did this huge, massive funding for the war on cancer. And the next thing you knew is that there was AIDS. And what was happening was there was this giant group of people, researchers, whose now money is running out on their failed war on cancer. They want to take the same methodologies and use it to fight AIDS. And I found myself in that world learning that, that technology. I do not have a scientific background. I flip homes, I'm a broker, and I have a strong financial background. But I could do their stuff and I could read their stuff, and it's just horrible stuff to read. But my goal was to stop that, was not to let them these people just get this, as Barb Barker used to call it, welfare, research welfare. So Eric Menendez, how does he fall into all of this? I'm telling you right now, the world in which you go, you just don't know the path. My path was, I was in jail, downtown LA, for my third time. But this time it was a long time. I was sentenced to 90 days. He was allowed to walk the halls at night because that was the only exercise he got. They put us in an area called K10V, V being visible, the media was following us. 10 is the highest and most secure place in the prison. They didn't want us hurt. And I don't know what the K was. But anyways, he would come to the door. We found each other. We talked through the door. He told me, we'll never talk about anything with the trial. I don't want you to have to show up. This was before he was tried. And I told him our story. And he was absolutely fascinated by what we were doing and what was going on. I bring this up to you because you just never know who you're talking to, who has an interest, who could be the next person to help. It hurts to say that he's still there when you learn about what's happened. Something has come up, he might get moved forward. But it was more injustices and stuff. So now I'm going to talk to you about Billy and how that all came about and what Billy means to me. It fit into my program because the zookeepers lied. They lie to children every single day when they talk about certain things. Billy has what's called a stereotypic behavior where he just rocks and bobs his head. David amazingly put together a trial that you just can't believe. And the expert that came from all over the world to talk and to support what's happening to the elephants at the LA Zoo. Stereotypic behavior is not seen anywhere in any elephant community except in a zoo. But the zookeepers would say that Billy bobbed his head as comfort because he knew he was going to be fed. This is what they would say. This is what they say. Lie after lie after lie. And you have to be motivated enough to say, you know what, this is unacceptable. My journey in the 7-year trial was made up of so many different things. And it was not the technical aspect of what was happening at the trial, though I listened and I heard everything that was going on. It was the people in the hallways that would talk to you. It was the people in front of the zoo, a zoo which I had never stepped foot into until David asked me. He said, well, you're the plaintiff. You better go look at this exhibit we're talking about. So I went to go see Billy. And I was absolutely shocked at what I saw. I grew up in Detroit. We had the Detroit Zoo. Somehow I thought the LA Zoo would be this amazing place. Not that I think a zoo is a great place. What I'm saying is just that as far as comparison, it would be really a great place. It was horrible. I never saw more animals in more horrible conditions than I did going to the LA Zoo. And then I saw Billy. And it was really pathetic. And to think that any child can learn anything about an elephant by watching Billy. At the time, he was in an enclosure maybe the size of these pillars right here. To think that would be anything that any child could learn was absolutely the most ridiculous thing and painful to me. It was painful. Because how do these parents bring these kids and do something like that and think there's anything good that comes out of it? There was this thing going forward, about $42 million to build this incredible elephant exhibit. And while the zoo was asking for the money, an elephant named Gita died, who when asked about Gita 6 weeks prior, oh, we're helping her. These elephants die because they stand, their bones go through the bottom of their feet, they crack the pads, and disease comes in. It's a horrible, painful death. Gita used to take a giant bowl, hand it to her caretaker, who they would fill it with water, hot water, and to soak her feet. Gita was dead. She became the 14th that died prematurely. They got their funding, even though we had found 100 acres of land outside of the zoo where Billy could have gone. But no, Billy had to go. They build this exhibit. We go there, we look. All that water that you see at that exhibit, all the trees that you see at that exhibit are all electrified. Billy can't touch any of it. That day, the water in which he goes into, an electrical line had fallen into that water, and that water was full of electricity. So if he was to take a step into that thing, he would have been shot. it goes back to the lies, is what keeps happening. It just keeps going back to the lies. The trial court said, summary judgment, we talked about that. I want to go to where. So this judge, who knew nothing before our trial, he said, all is not well at the Elephants of Asia exhibit at the LA Zoo. Contrary to the zoo's representatives may have told the city of Los Angeles, in order to get construction of the $42 million exhibit approved and funded, the elephants are not healthy, happy, nor thriving at the LA Zoo. What am I doing today? So today, I find myself, I'm involved in land conservation, is what I'm doing. The Prescott Preserve is a former golf course in the heart of Palm Springs. We got an amazing person who said, when we were looking to raise the money to buy it, the developer wanted 15 million. This is where sometimes you never know your value. You don't know what is really good, because I, as a real estate broker on a very high level, was able to talk the guy who owns this preserve, who owned the golf course. He wanted 15 million for it. I said, come on, you're never gonna get $15 million for it. He says, well, I want to do this, I want to do that. I said, it's 132 acres. I said, give us 122 acres, 120 acres. We'll give you $8.7 million for it. He goes, well, how quickly do you think you can do it? This guy for over 4 years was trying to sell it for $15 million. I said, I don't know, but let me see what I can do. Working with some brilliant people and an unbelievably generous individual, we raised $8.7 million and bought the thing, and it will now be a permanent preserve. It's called Oswith Land Trust. We are only 3 years old. We have put over 5,000 acres in permanent conservancy in the Coachella Valley. 20 million through public grants and over $12 million through private grants. So, thank you, through private grants. You're a very sweet timekeeper, even though you put that pressure on you. And this is what we do. You know, this is the new direction of what we're doing. I think the one thing is that Dave and I are certainly, our families are friendly. We stay in touch with each other. This has started a conversation about what are we going to do, revisit to see if we can't get Billy out, because it is unfinished business, and he really deserves to get to one of these sanctuaries. Thank you for my time.
Okay. And our last, am I on here? Okay, our last speaker, Rebeka Breder. Rebeka is an animal law lawyer at Breder Law in Vancouver, the first law firm of its kind to exclusively focus on animal law in Western Canada. When acting for individuals, Rebeka takes on cases such as the defense of dogs, condominium disputes, pet custody issues, and wrongful death. For organizations, Rebeka challenges government authority with respect to its actions or inactions regarding animals such as the live export of horses or killing wildlife. Her cases have set positive precedent for animals, and she has been recognized by various awards, including the top 25 most influential lawyers in Canada and the Seeds Award by the International Society for Animal Rights. Please welcome Rebeka Breder.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me, and to ALDF for organizing, for you being here. I kind of feel like my heart pressure is being taken. This is for a mic, apparently, for later. So I'm here as your, I think, friendly northern neighbor from Canada. So it's Vancouver, Canada, British Columbia, Canada, just to be clear. And I was asked to talk about my animal law career. And I think it's very fitting to put it in this panel, because as I see it, being an animal law lawyer where I'm advocating for animals in the courtroom is a form of activism. It's a different form, but it is a kind of activism. So I thought I would start out by giving you a little bit of an idea of how I started and a little bit of who I am. This is a picture of me, 13 years old. I grew up in Montreal, and from a very young age, I just always felt like I needed to be a voice for animals. This is a picture of me in the newspaper where I was in the middle with gathering the signatures for petitions and going around to local city councils to try and ban local duck hunting. And I had amazing support from my family and from friends and from the local community. I can't say I was very successful ultimately. At the beginning, I think the hunting really stopped. The main argument was I was looking at local bylaws that prevented the discharge of firearms within a certain number of meters from shore. So it wasn't don't shoot ducks. It was more there's a constant violation of our firearm discharge bylaws by allowing the duck hunting to happen. So it was enforced for a little bit, but from what I hear from my mom, who still lives there, sadly, they're still hunting, but we can't say we didn't try. So my activism started from a young age. And then into my teenage years, this is a picture of me on the right with the red coat, protesting the commercial seal hunt out on the Canadian eastern coast. And I was an animal rights activist in the way that you can imagine, you know, on the streets with a microphone, organizing protests. And it was probably around that time where I had in my mind that I either wanted to be a French teacher, don't ask why. I'm from Quebec, so I loved French, which was very odd to like grammar when you're young. But it was either to be a French teacher or to be an environmental lawyer. Because at that time, animal law, well, I shouldn't say animal law didn't exist, but I couldn't articulate animal law in my head. And that was in the 90s. So I'm dating myself. And so I wanted to go into law school to be an environmental lawyer where I thought, okay, if I help nature, I'll help animals. And so I had my eye on BC from probably shortly after that. I was always attracted to mountains and ocean. And then fast forward, so I don't have very pretty slides. I'm just gonna you have to listen to me babble as opposed to look at pretty pictures. So I decided to go to law school. And again, at that time, it wasn't that I was going into law school to end up with a degree or a certificate in animal law. That just didn't exist at that time in the early 2000s at that point. And so my idea was I was going to work for an environmental nonprofit organization and an environmental law organization at that. And then I quickly realized that financially for me, so I don't come from a family of wealth or where I got financial support. I did have scholarships, so that helped me. But I quickly, well, in my undergrad, not law school. But I quickly realized that I cannot afford working for an NGO. I have to start out the conventional way where I did interviews with the bigger firms. And then, and that's how I started my career. And so I'm just going to pause here to say that for anyone who wants to practice in animal law or a niche area, I strongly encourage you to actually not practice in the niche area at the very beginning, because I always kind of say everything happens for a reason. And I think the reason why I couldn't really afford to start working for a nonprofit, the reason was that it really made me build an amazing network and learn from experienced lawyers and work in different areas, because animal law really is a general area of practice. So it involves administrative law, it involves civil litigation, it involves property, it involves a whole array of different subjects. So I was lucky enough that I ended up at a fairly large firm for a good 10 to 12 years of the beginning of my career. And that's where I started building my animal law practice. And in my early days, I started taking on animal files almost immediately. People knew that I liked animals, and then my connections because of my animal rights activism, files were starting to come my way. At the beginning, it was much more pro bono. And as long as I met my target for the firm, they didn't really care. And as long as it wasn't a business conflict. And then I wanted to join a Canadian Bar Association animal law section, and there was none. This was back in the mid 2000s. And so I created the first one in Canada, and now there are a few. Our Canadian Bar Association is your equivalent to American Bar Association. And so still being involved in my career early on. And then I decided to branch out and to start my own animal law firm in 2016. And doing exclusively only animal law. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So I'm in private practice. It's just me and my assistant. And then when budget allows, I get other lawyers to help. The bulk of my work, I would say, is dealing with companion animal issues. So the defense of dogs, pet custody type of issues, condominium issues when someone wants to, when a condominium wants to kick out an animal. And I see this really, I can't emphasize it enough. For me, I really see this as a form of activism, because when I'm defending a dog accused of being dangerous and is then put on death row and actually have a trial this coming week, thought it would settle, didn't. Now we're continuing on with the trial. But when I am able to be that voice for the dog and manage to save that dog's life, to me, that is advocating for that animal and trying to set good precedent along the way. Pet custody, you don't necessarily naturally equate that with local activism, but in pet custody cases, just like here, animals we all know are considered property. But I always, since I started doing these cases, have been arguing that animals are, yes, we know that they're property, but they're more than just property. We know that we cannot be treating them like the chairs that you're sitting on. And so when I realized, included some slides of judges and their specific wording that they used agreeing with some of my arguments. But when I get judges say things like, I agree with Ms. Breder that an animal is more than property, more than just chattel, and that we need to consider their best interest, that to me is amazing. And one of the challenges is standing in front of a judge, getting the decision at the end. And, you know, as lawyers, we have to always have a poker face. And so one of the challenges is in times like that, I so want to do yes, but I have to maintain my composure, and then my clients and I, you know, jump up and down outside of the courtroom. By the same token, when we have bad decisions, I feel like punching someone in the face, but obviously don't. And so the idea is that, and the message that I'd like to convey is that there are very different forms of activism, and being an animal law lawyer certainly falls into that category. Some of the other cases that I've dealt with is suing government over the transportation of live horses. I don't know if you know, but Canada, because the United States doesn't do that, United States ships its horses, some of its horses up to Canada, where they get shipped over to Japan to be slaughtered for sushi. So we're in the middle of suing the federal government over that, suing the provincial government in British Columbia over killing wolves, culling wolves, and I've been involved in other cases with different types of killing of wildlife. So it's being a voice for animals in court. I know I don't have much time left. So I'm just going to end by just saying a couple of the challenges for me. And and then end on a more positive note. So I think the two main challenges for me is, and it's not really articulated that well in the slide, so I'll just explain it here. One is an emotional component. I think doing this work for any of us is quite taxing on the heart. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. And you would expect that after a certain amount of time, you've dealt with sad cases, you've dealt with just the upsetting nature, to say the least, of these types of issues. But that does not go away. And I'll just put in a plug about how important it is to maintain your mental health. Because if you keep bearing it in, and this is a type of area that it's so easy to do that, because you're on the go, you're constantly trying to help animals, but you have to make sure that you do something for yourself that makes you happy. Personally, I can't, at the end of the day, which is very often quite late, if I sit down to watch TV, I do not actually watch, for me, I can't watch anything dealing with animal suffering. I can't. I like to watch the least that my brain works at the end of the day, the better. And so you just have to find, and I've developed this new passion for surfing, and I wish I could do more of that. I did squeeze in a little bit going to Malibu for the first time in my life here. Then I was so happy about that. But the point is that you really have to, this is such a hard area emotionally. And that's one of the biggest challenges. So just guard your mental health. Secondly, there's the financial component. And a question that I often get is, well, how do you make a living doing animal law? Who pays you? And then other lawyers who aren't in this field at all, they're like, oh yeah, what, the rabbits pay you? Or, and so it's really not a joke. You have to, I never considered myself a business person, but in order to maintain a practice in private practice, just like any other area of the law, I think part of being a good lawyer is not just knowing the law and being a good advocate for your clients in court, but it's being able to manage your practice. And that's a whole other area of your brain that gets activated that you don't really, at least in my time during law school, we weren't taught all the administrative stuff. But you have to really keep an eye on being able to maintain a living from this. And I don't know if Russ Mead is in here, but poor Russ, I really chewed his ear off last night over a couple of beers because we were going back and forth on ideas on just what that means. And you have to find a way that you're comfortable with charging clients. People have different opinions on how to do that. Personally, and so far, and I am in the process of reassessing this, but the way I've been doing it is because I can't afford to take on pro bono. And the reason is because I lower my hourly rate and my rates in general to a point where I could sustain a living doing it, but I can't really go much lower than that. So everyone, I would just, like the story that we heard before about when David was saying how the client said, I can't afford you. Yeah, that would kill me. So I lower my rates enough that it's palatable, but that I could still keep the office doors open, the lights on. But it is a challenge. To end, and I know we're out of time, so I'll just end on a couple of positive notes, is that being an animal law lawyer in private practice is really, it's as rewarding and as meaningful as you would probably think it is. It's tough, like I said, for a number of reasons, but when you get that judge that actually agrees with you and that talks about the best interests of animals, or that case where you're granted standing to be the voice for wolves who are being slaughtered from helicopters, when you get those moments, you really have to take the time to just absorb it and celebrate them, because there are a lot of losses, but there are also some wins. And every little win is actually a huge step forward for animals. And if you have companion animals at home, you could get away with having a little bit of fur on your trousers or a dress in court. So I'll leave it at that. I am more than happy to connect with anyone by phone, email, or however you want to contact me. And thank you so much.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time for questions. I want to thank all of our presenters, Rebeka, Aaron, and David, for those great presentations. We will now turn to questions from the audience. If you have a question, please stand up behind the microphone. And those of you joining us virtually, you can submit questions via the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen.
Hi, maybe a little bit in the weeds, but it's about the Billy case. The question itself, the case has been brought under California TL. Maybe some context for people who don't know what that is. California has a law that prevents what's called unfair competition, which lets people sue for unlawful business practices or unfair business practices. ALDF, PETA, other groups have had success enforcing California's foie gras ban by suing restaurants and chefs directly. The California Supreme Court's affirmed that those kinds of organizations have standing to do so. Is it that the UCL doesn't apply to the city? Is it that nobody wants to do another $7 million 7-year case? Would the Supreme Court's decision kind of prevent getting around it through another statute?
I think the answer is that, can you hear me okay? Is it on? I think the answer is that UCL has been tried in a variety of contexts. The zoos are particularly immune from it because they're part of an organization, the American Zoological and Aquarium, AZA. It's a cult. I mean, let's be real about it. It's a business cult, and they don't care what they say. They hide. We took the depositions of people from zoos all over the country, and we crucified these people on cross-examination. And the only thing we got out of it is the zoo was afraid to call them at the trial because they knew they were going to be crushed. But they called other people and they got crushed, and it didn't seem to matter. And we had direct standing pursuant to the Court of Appeal. We looked at the UCL at the outset and thought there are cases really on it, and there are very specific standards, and it's not an easy sell. I wouldn't hesitate to try it if you have a case where you think it might be appropriate, because the worst that can happen is you lose and the animal's suffering anyway. But in this particular case, when they came to me, there had been lawyers for years that had looked at it and passed on and talked about filing cases. And when we looked at 526A, we thought this is our best shot. And I don't regret it. I only regret what happened to it. Yeah. And it's great. And I'm saying I wouldn't hesitate to file it. I'm retired. I'm trying to make a difference another way, because to be in a courtroom, try cases, you have to have nerves of steel. And 43 years of it, my steel's kind of melted. But I do recommend, if you think there's a way to go, and listen, I haven't followed the case law in the last couple of years. If you think there's a way to go, Billy's still there. I'll be happy to give you tons of evidence. So.
My question is for Rebeka, and it is, how do you make a living with your practice? Is it based on attorney's fees, more or less, or are you actually getting retainers from clients? And how do you find clients? How do the clients come to you?
Thank you for the question. So I do not take on contingency. I bill by the hour. I mainly billing by the hour, but also sometimes more of like a bundled service as I call it. So for certain steps in the proceeding, I charge a certain amount, but it's mainly on an hourly basis, and I give clients an estimate. And one of the things that I learned very early on in my career, and this is one of the benefits of working for a larger firm, is they teach you these things. Before starting on a file, I almost always get funds to put in trust so that I'm guaranteed payment at least for some of the work. And so I just don't start, generally speaking, I sometimes deviate from that, but I generally don't start working until I have money in the trust account that will cover my fees. Oh, and yes, thank you. Yeah, I think at this point, it's a combination of online and word of mouth, referrals from other lawyers, from other clients. That's probably the biggest compliment that I could get. Referrals from organizations that I've had a relationship with for many years, and people know that this is what I do. So, but I think having an online presence is quite important. I'm not a big fan of social media. I'm on it, not very active, or not as active as I probably should be. And I could tell you if it wasn't for work, I probably wouldn't be on it. But I think that said, it's important to have an online presence. No, I mean, I am quite often called to do media interviews. And what I found is that's one of the ways that people find me too. They're like, oh, I heard you on the radio, or I saw you on this show. And so it's a lot. So in my mind, that in a way is marketing, because I'm not paying anything for them to have me on air, but it certainly is costing me in terms of time. Yeah, so so I'll just say one more thing about that, is for anyone who wants to build a practice in this area, I think one of the things to do is to try and get involved as much as possible, coming to things like this, meeting people who are in the same area, making those connections, and doing it in a genuine way. I'll just leave it at that.
Hey, my question is also directed at Rebeka based on what you said. I also am from Montreal. We talked last night, but I grew up in the United States and I've traveled all over. And so my passions really span North America, but American jurisprudence doesn't necessarily care about other countries' laws. How do you and the rest of the activists and lawyers, how do you guys navigate that?
Well, I think the theme has been that the lawyers advocating for animals in court, and thank you for the question, that the lawyers advocating in court on behalf of animals, we kind of make stuff up along the way sometimes, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I really do feel that we're still at a point in history where we're carving the path. And I do look at other jurisdictions sometimes, but more so it's drawing analogies and sometimes just arguing on the basis of common sense. So as an example, and it just top of mind because I was working on this a couple of weeks ago, but when arguing that animals are property, yeah, we know that animals are property. But in this context where there's a dog in question, we can't be treating the dog like a piece of furniture. And there's more and more case law like that. And the challenge I find in this area is that, I don't know how it is here, but I'm assuming it's quite similar, is that you could have as a lawyer a whole number of cases that you argue in court, but not all of them are on Westlaw or whatever legal databases. They're not all reported. So, and I know some of my cases aren't. So I keep track of them. And when lawyers are sometimes need my help, they're like, oh, I thought you did this case. I'm like, yeah, here you go. Here's the decision. And so that's one way also, is keeping your antennas up to know who to reach out to, who can maybe give you some guidance.
So we're almost out of time. We're a little over, but I want to take one last question from one of our listeners online.
Okay, so we have a question from Jennifer, who's asking, is there a statute of limitation on animal cruelty cases? She says reform practices have helped better her local shelter to adopt out from illegally killing healthy animals, but we fear they still may be doing that.
Does anyone want to take that? I think this question actually came up in another panel, and the answer was more maybe we would need some more specific background on that particular case to be able to answer it. But I don't know, is there anyone in the room who has an answer for that?
Well, the only thing I would say is I've never been asked to litigate a case where it wasn't ongoing. So the idea that somebody comes to me about an injury to their dog, cat, elephant, et cetera, from 3, 5, 7 years ago seems probably not likely I could pursue it, but I don't know the law on it because it never came up.
I could do your statute of limitations answer if you'd like.
Oh, great.
So,
Thank you.
and with the caveat, this is America and American law, USA law, and it will differ from state to state. Generally, your statute of limitations for misdemeanor animal cruelty is going to be 2 years-ish. Felony animal cruelty is going to be 5 years-ish. It may be higher for particular kinds of crimes, maybe higher for federal crimes, but it is certainly more limited than, for example, a homicide, which typically has an unlimited statute of limitations. And you do need to be cognizant of that when you're looking at litigating.
But that's criminal law and that's that's handled by the public entities. I mean, for a private lawyer representing people on cases, we don't ever deal with that. We do, however, sometimes cross over saying it was an act that would constitute a crime, but we pursue it in a civil way, much like the Billy case. So again, I've never seen anybody come forward and say, I'd like to litigate now over something that happened years ago. So I've never dealt with the issue directly.
So that is the conclusion of this session. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for joining us.